Welcome back. Let's continue to this now. Disaster risk management officials in the Western Cape are on alert ahead of a series of cold fronts expected in the province this week. The Cape Town Weather Office has issued a level 2 weather warning and says scattered to widespread rainfall as well as high waves are expected across large parts of the province. Professor Patrick Bond at the Department of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg joins us now. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Not only was a weather warning for the Western Cape, but also for Gauteng. Of course, this brings to question a number of issues, and I want us to speak about climate change and its involvement in this particular warning that we're hearing. But essentially, how worried then should we be in terms of just the reaction and response time, particularly when you look at these weather warnings and how they have devastated areas like KwaZulu-Natal, if you also want to add provinces into the fray?
Yes, I think that's the crucial one. Thanks, Sanati. Thanks for having me. Look, I think the KZN experience, where especially February, March, the heavy rains killed many and showed yet again that Durban, especially at eThekwini, is simply not climate-proofed, and that means there isn't investment in stormwater drainage or stronger bridges and roads, or especially housing. It's still a largely shack settlement terrain, especially up the hills, where the flooding and mudslides are the worst. And now this is crucial this week because the budget on Wednesday is not anticipated to have enough space from Finance Minister Godongwana to expand our climate adaptation, our resilience investments. And that's tragic, partly because at the same time, we're going to see President Ramaphosa offering up to President Donald Trump and his friends in big oil, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Peabody, Anadarko, the big U.S. oil companies, our offshore oil and gas leases, according to the presidential spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya. He told this to the New York Times as early as February, but as you probably remember, there are lots of contestations along the Wild Coast, along the Atlantic coastline about Total and Shell and their local ally, Johnny Copeland, in doing exactly the same. And Total actually walked away from that. And I think this is the crucial problem, as Donald Trump probably does not come to Johannesburg in November for the G20, and his energy and environment ministers don't come to any of the G20 ministerials. They're doing a boycott. What would Cyril Ramaphosa do? Can he raise this question of trying to stop the climate crisis before it gets completely out of control, which it is in many parts of the US. Even Los Angeles burning was a climate-related event. Or will he just be very diplomatic and quiet about this one huge problem where Donald Trump, I think, will do his best to sabotage the G20, and if he hosts it next year, will very much avoid any discussion of climate.
And when we consider, world leaders and their reaction to climate change, I mean, in COP29, we saw how world leaders really spoke boldly about action against climate change. And the concern, of course, now, as you also rightfully say, with, President Trump and the conversations with President Cyril Ramaphosa and the G20 question coming up, boycotts or no boycotts. How concerned are you that, even in the G20 meetings, that this was not taken seriously, particularly when you consider some of the sweeping statements that were made during the world leaders' use of COP29?
Yes, that COP29 that was held in Baku, which is in Azerbaijan, a major oil state. So you'd sort of expect them to be maybe talking green, but walking dirty. They're very, very hypocritical, all the leaders, including our own. And that was shown when the most desperate countries, the small island development states, and the least developed countries, LDCs, of which there are many African countries, they walked out in protest just before the end of that COP29. And unfortunately, South Africa's Environment Minister, Deon George, ignored it and stayed with the high-polluting countries. The AU is split. The African Union is now a member of the G20 as of 2 years ago, and this is a chance for them here on home soil in November to raise climate, but the question is whether they'll have the guts to do so. The other element that's crucial is that the COP30, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Conference of the Parties 30, is held in Brazil in December. And the BRICS summit is also being held in July in Rio de Janeiro. Now, that means that Lula Ignacio da Silva, the president of Brazil, has a huge responsibility. They're holding this COP30 in the Amazon. And what the couple of weeks before that, November 22 and 23, here in Sandton represents is a major threat to whether they can actually make any progress, because if Donald Trump is there or if he's not there, I don't expect much to be done on climate.
And just speaking about, just some of the response time, I want to take it back, to South Africa and what we're currently seeing. Just given the growing threat of extreme weather events in this country particularly, what long-term climate adaptation strategies do you think should be taken, particularly in the problematic provinces?
Yes, well, KZN again shows, because the worst single event was the rain bomb of April 2022, and that was when about 500 people lost their lives or are still missing. And really, the only adaptation investment that I've seen in that area, especially South Durban, the hardest hit place, is new investment in stormwater drainage and pumping for the Toyota facility. It would be great if Toyota was producing lots of electric vehicles there, but they're not. They're producing the diesel and petrol engine. And that brings us back finally to the way Donald Trump doesn't want South African autos coming to the US. He's put the 25% tariff on, as well as on the steel and aluminium exports from South Africa to the US. And, they use so much electricity. That is coal-fired power. And I think if BHP Billiton in Richards Bay, it's called South 32, or ArcelorMittal, which is already shutting down its steel foundries all over the place, if they had a little less electricity because Donald Trump keeps his tariffs and lowers U.S. demand, well, we might have more electricity for the rest of us, for labor-intensive industry, small businesses, and households. And that, in turn, might mean we can then ramp down our consumption and have a lower CO2 emissions profile. And I'm hoping that would be a win-win for everyone. Of course, not for the big bosses in Australia, in India, in the car headquarters in Germany and Tokyo. But I think it is the time for us to ask these tough questions. Who's using electricity? And if Donald Trump puts on these sanctions because Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't agree to the concessions he wants, like ending the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice cases against Israel, or changing our affirmative action policies, if Ramaphosa is not willing to do that, maybe it is okay to take the hit, which would be lower sales to the US and therefore potential redistribution of our electricity.
Absolutely. Prof, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Professor Patrick Bond, Department of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg, for us.